to look for truth inside, does that make biologist, physicist or scientist non-Nangpa? That's a good question. Buddhism teaches us to accept, make us move able to accept things for what they are. However, it is very hard to live with this ideology in a very competitive world like ours. Could you please talk a little bit about this? There's a very good question, especially the second one. Most of the Tibetans here, you can all follow English, right? Yeah, everybody can follow English? Yeah, okay, so I'm not going to bother translating to Tibetan the question. What I meant searching for insight in a spiritual sense. So of course you can be a physicist and look for outside and be a Nangpa at the same time, but in a spiritual sense, whereas the theistic religions like Christians and Jews and Islam, there the focus is more outward towards God. Whereas in Buddhism, because there is no God, the spiritual practices is focused more into self-discovery. So that's what I meant. So there is no problem in someone being a physicist and studying the outside world, but at the same time being a Buddhist in terms of searching spiritually inside. So that's no contradiction. The second question is a very important question, because this is again a question that ties up with the understanding of karma, because sometimes people, and also particularly in Western popular writings, they have kind of a certain stereotypes of what Buddhism is. They probably would say Buddhism is about not judging what is happening in the world, but rather just accepting the way it is. Buddhism is about detachment. Buddhism is about not having attachment, and so Buddhism is about letting go. So there are all these popular kind of cliches about Buddhism. So since you are culturally Buddhists and have a reasonably good command of Tibetan, and then have access to books written by real masters like His Holiness, I think you should try to form your understanding of Buddhism based on these, rather than what the popular Western presentation of Buddhism gives you. The question of accepting the way things are, again here we have to understand, when Buddhism says be more accepting of what happens to you, be more open-hearted, be less judgmental, they are not saying there are no good and bad things in the world. They are not saying there are right and wrong things in the world. Of course there are. The whole idea of karma is based on the distinction between a good action and a bad action. But the difference is that in Buddhism, when you distinguish between good and a bad karma, you don't do it on the basis of there being an absolute God who has a law that says this is right and this is wrong. The Buddhist distinction between good and bad karma is related to the experience of suffering. Any action that is harmful, that causes harm to you and others, that's bad, that's destructive. Any action that promotes yours and others' happiness, long-term well-being, that is constructive because it contributes to happiness. And that's the demarcation. Again, the foundation is compassion. The key ethical principle in Buddhism is compassion. So based on that, you judge whether a certain action is right or wrong, based upon its effect upon others. So once you understand the good and bad in those terms, then you are less judgmental, because you tend to relate to people who do bad things in a compassionate spirit. And then you are more accepting. You don't, for example, if something bad happens to you, you don't freak out and say, oh, why me? It's unfair. It's just, damn with the rest of the world. You don't react in that manner. You accept it as possibly partly a result of your own karma. But that doesn't mean you don't do anything about it. You don't do anything about it. That's where the mistake comes in. People, when they say Buddhism teaches greater acceptance of life, they immediately interpret that means Buddhism suggests you stay where you are. That's not the case. You accept what has happened to you, and then you make an effort to improve it. So this is, that's again, it's this distinction between a fatalistic understanding of karma, where like the Hindus were trying to justify their discrimination based on caste because it's their karma. You can't move. You have to stay where you are. That's not the Buddhist way of understanding karma. Karma is one of the factors that contributed to what happens to you now, but you still have room for changes. And since ultimately it is yourself who is the master, who is responsible for what happens to you, it is in your interest to do something about what has happened to you. So this acceptance of the way things are should not be misunderstood as suggesting that you should not do anything about it. So this is where the problem is. So in a competitive world, for example, if you're in your workplace, you compete with others, so long as you do so with a degree of empathy for others. And His Holiness often makes the distinction between positive competition and a negative competition. And he says that the distinct difference is that positive competition will, compete with the spirit that I don't want to be left behind. I want to make sure that I'm not left behind. So you make sure that you're not left behind. Whereas the negative competition would be, I want everybody else to be down there. I want to be up there. So it's a sense of competitiveness in both elements. But in one, you are totally self-focused and you are willing to even trample upon others and be, destructive and not care for others' well-being. In the other context, you compete, but you compete with a sense of equality. So from this point of view, then one can be accepting of the reality, but at the same time compete to improve your own situation. And if Buddhism is only saying you should accept where you are and don't do anything, then there is no, what is the whole point of creating all these complex philosophical systems? Why bother? Why make effort? So I think it's important not to confuse, acceptance with not doing anything. So this is an important point.